In 1945, when most Americans were starving for something beautiful after years of war rationing, a new kind of orange dessert promised hope. Frozen orange juice turned into walls of shimmering jelly desserts on dinner tables across the country. But by 1957, many families quietly banished those mulled orange miracles from their funerals and holiday tables. Why? Because one unexpected mishap at a small-town holiday feast nearly ruined a brand and changed how home cooks saw frozen desserts forever. Stay tuned, we're about to uncover that forgotten tale, and one of the lost recipes that survived anyway. It began in a quiet American kitchen, sometime around 1946. The war was over, but the memories weren't. Families were rebuilding their lives, dreaming of peace, color, and comfort. One of those families was the Harpers from Des Moines, Iowa. Every Sunday, Mrs. Harper opened her brand-new Betty Crocker cookbook, a gift from her husband, who'd just returned from the Pacific. That book became her Bible of hope. But one winter evening, as she served her bright frozen orange salad, the unthinkable happened. The salad refused to freeze. It melted into a pale, sticky puddle. The family laughed, but she didn't. That night, she wrote in her diary, "Even hope melts, sometimes." Yet that failed dish would live on, reshaped, retested, reborn, just like post-war America itself. From that moment, a new era of home cooking began, bold, experimental, sometimes strange, but always filled with love. Betty Crocker became the voice of that era, guiding millions of homemakers through recipes that blended convenience with creativity. But as decades passed, many of those once beloved dishes quietly vanished, erased from dinner tables, forgotten in dusty cookbooks, and replaced by fast food and frozen dinners. Today, we're bringing them back. In this video, we'll rediscover 10 lost Betty Crocker creations that once ruled America's kitchens, from the mysterious frozen orange salad that symbolized post-war dreams, to the creamy ranch slaw with mayonnaise, born from the rise of Hidden Valley Ranch, the quirky pineapple cheese dish that divided families at church picnics, and the glossy glazed meatballs that fueled 1950s cocktail parties. Each dish tells a story of families, traditions, and the strange beauty of an era when food wasn't just nourishment, it was memory. It had the color of sunlight and the taste of optimism, a dessert that shimmered like hope itself. In the years after World War II, frozen orange salad became a symbol of post-war America's hunger for beauty. Housewives clipped the recipe straight from Betty Crocker booklets, dreaming of serving something elegant yet affordable. But few remember why it became famous. The secret wasn't just flavor, it was technology. During the war, scientists had developed a new process for frozen orange juice concentrate to nourish soldiers overseas. When peace returned, that invention found its way into American kitchens, turning orange juice into a modern marvel, cheap, shelf-stable, and bursting with color. By the early 1950s, women were freezing mixtures of whipped cream, cream cheese, and orange concentrate into molds shaped like blossoms or rings. Each shimmering slice looked like a slice of Florida sunshine, even in the grayest Midwest winter. Yet beneath the perfection, there was chaos. A 1953 Better Homes letter told of one homemaker whose mold collapsed during a church luncheon. "The ladies gasped," she wrote, "and I nearly cried." In that era, reputation was baked, or frozen, into every dish. Still, the recipe endured. It wasn't just dessert, it was pride, invention, and a little bit of rebellion. As decades passed, the gelatin molds disappeared, the cookbooks yellowed, and the recipe slipped quietly into memory. But if you ask someone who grew up in the 1950s, they'll tell you the first bite of frozen orange salad tasted like a promise. Sweet, cold, and fleeting, like the American dream itself. It started on a dusty ranch in the foothills of Santa Barbara, long before the world knew what ranch dressing even was. In the early 1950s, a former plumbing contractor named Steve Henson was running a small guest ranch with his wife. The guests adored his homemade buttermilk dressing, a secret mix of herbs, mayo, and garlic that he'd whisked together after long, sunburned days on the range. Word spread like wildfire. That ranch, Hidden Valley Ranch, became the birthplace of a flavor that would change America's salads forever. But few remember how quickly that taste found its way into the most ordinary dish, coleslaw. By the late 50s, Betty Crocker home cooks were folding mayonnaise and that new ranch-style flavor into shredded cabbage, carrots, and onions. It was creamy, tangy, and wildly modern, a rebellion against Grandma's old vinegar slaw. Families were divided. Some called it a miracle in a bowl, others swore it ruined Sunday suppers. There's an old clipping from a 1961 Iowa newspaper. A reader writes, "My mother says I've betrayed her kitchen with this new creamy slaw. But my husband eats nothing else now." That single letter captured the crossroads of post-war America, tradition versus convenience, heritage versus progress. Ranch slaw became a symbol of the changing American table, where shortcuts met style, and old recipes quietly disappeared. Today, we see it as simple comfort food. But once upon a time, it was the taste of rebellion, of the new frontier, of America learning to modernize its own kitchen. And next, we'll journey deeper into that mid-century imagination, with a dish that confused, divided, and still fascinates food historians, the pineapple cheese dish. Some recipes are loved. Others are feared. And then there's pineapple cheese dish, the one that did both. It was the late 1950s, and America was obsessed with showpiece food. Every dinner table had to sparkle, fruit towers, mold salads, and golden glazes. Pineapple rings were the crown jewels of mid-century cooking, a tropical dream shipped straight from Hawaii to your local A&P store. Enter Betty Crocker's pineapple cheese dish, a bizarre combination of crushed pineapple, shredded cheddar, mayonnaise, and cracker crumbs baked into a bubbling casserole. It looked sweet, smelled savory, and confused nearly everyone. But behind that odd mix lies a story of class and culture. In 1956, a housewife from Kansas named Helen Monroe entered a local church bake-off. She couldn't afford fancy meats or imported ingredients, so she improvised, mixing leftover cheddar with canned pineapple and mayo. The judges were stunned. It didn't fit any rule. Sweet? Savory? Dessert? Side dish? It broke every boundary. And she won first prize. Soon, the recipe spread across America through Betty Crocker's Homemaker Exchange, where women mailed each other handwritten recipes. Some called it Sunshine Casserole. Others, the Pineapple Cheese Mystery. Families debated whether to serve it with ham or with cake. By the 1970s, it quietly disappeared, too odd, too unpredictable for modern tastes. But for a brief, golden moment, it captured the daring heart of mid-century America, inventive, fearless, and a little bit wild. Because sometimes, the strangest combinations tell the truest stories. They glittered under the kitchen light like tiny jewels, sweet, sticky, perfectly round. Glazed meatballs weren't just food, they were the soul of every 1950s cocktail party. But few remember where they began, not in fancy cities, but in small-town living rooms where families were learning the art of entertaining. Post-war America had discovered something new, the appetizer era. Betty Crocker booklets urged homemakers to dazzle their guests with recipes that looked elegant but used humble ingredients, and nothing fit that dream better than a plate of glossy meatballs swimming in tangy sauce. The story goes back to 1954, in a modest Ohio neighborhood. A young couple, the Carters, were hosting their very first party. Nervous and short on money, Mrs. Carter found a recipe in a Betty Crocker hostess book, Glazed Meatballs, a modern marvel. She mixed ground beef with breadcrumbs and ketchup, simmered them in grape jelly and chili sauce, and hoped for the best. But halfway through the night, disaster struck. The meatballs burned. The sweet glaze hardened into a caramel shell. She panicked until a guest took a bite. Then another. Suddenly, everyone was raving. That accident became a sensation. Within a year, sweet and tangy glazed meatballs appeared in countless community cookbooks. They became symbols of togetherness, simple, affordable, yet somehow glamorous. Families from Detroit to Dallas served them at holidays, weddings, and Sunday nights in front of the TV. By the 1980s, they faded into nostalgia, replaced by microwaved snacks and frozen hors d'oeuvres. But for one shimmering decade, those little glazed meatballs reminded Americans that joy didn't need perfection, just a little creativity and courage. It was the dish that promised everything: comfort, convenience, and a touch of mystery. In mid-century America, nothing said modern homemaker like tuna surprise. Born out of post-war practicality, this casserole became a weeknight hero in the 1950s. Tuna, cream of mushroom soup, peas, and crunchy noodles, simple, cheap, and filling. But here's the twist: no one actually knew what the surprise was supposed to be. Some said it was the secret ingredient, others joked it was the disappointment. Yet behind the jokes lies a story of survival. In 1951, a Minnesota widow named Margaret Ellis worked 2 jobs to feed her 3 children. Meat was expensive, but tuna, the new wonder protein, was affordable and patriotic. One night, she mixed her pantry leftovers, noodles, tuna, and a can of mushroom soup. Her kids loved it so much she wrote to Betty Crocker, calling it "my miracle supper." A year later, a similar recipe appeared in the Betty Crocker picture cookbook, renamed Tuna Surprise Casserole. Across America, it became the dish of working mothers and hurried dinners. It symbolized independence, women juggling new jobs and still putting a hot meal on the table. The surprise wasn't in the flavor. It was in the fact that something so humble could feel like love. By the 1970s, it was mocked as church potluck food, then quietly vanished. But for a generation of families, tuna surprise wasn't a joke, it was the taste of home after long days and quiet sacrifices. Because sometimes, the surprise isn't in the recipe, it's in the story behind it. It was a dessert so elegant that even the name sounded like music, peach melba. Yet by the 1960s, this once glamorous creation had all but disappeared from American tables. The story begins not in America, but in London's Savoy Hotel at the turn of the 20th century. The famous chef Auguste Escoffier created it in honor of Australian opera singer Nellie Melba, a duet of flavor and grace. Fresh peaches, raspberry sauce, and vanilla ice cream, simple, pure, and divine. When American homemakers discovered it after World War II, they saw more than a dessert, they saw sophistication in a bowl. By the 1950s, peach melba was the star of dinner parties. Canned peaches replaced fresh ones, raspberry jam took the place of sauce, and the dessert became a household luxury. Housewives would chill the glasses, drizzle syrup with precision, and serve it with pride, a small taste of European glamour in a suburban kitchen. But as gelatin molds, instant puddings, and neon-colored Jello took over, peach melba faded away. By the late 1970s, it was too old-fashioned, replaced by convenience desserts and boxed mixes that promised excitement without elegance. Still, those who remember it recall more than the taste. They remember the clink of spoons against crystal bowls, the hush before the first bite, and that fleeting feeling of refinement, as if the world slowed down just for dessert. Peach melba wasn't just about fruit and ice cream. It was about class, calm, and quiet joy, something truly rare in modern kitchens. They say you can tell a lot about an American kitchen by the smell that comes from it, and nothing spoke more of comfort, safety, and home than the scent of a bubbling chicken pot pie. In the years after World War II, when families were rebuilding their lives and suburbs were sprouting like spring grass, this golden-crusted dish became a symbol of something deeper: stability. It wasn't just dinner, it was reassurance in a flaky shell. But the origins of chicken pot pie go much further back, to colonial America, when early settlers adapted British meat pies using whatever they had: chicken, carrots, potatoes, and leftover gravy. It was rustic, hearty, and meant to stretch ingredients across a hungry household. For centuries, the recipe traveled from farmhouse to farmhouse, handwritten in fading ink on recipe cards, often tucked inside flour-dusted cookbooks that mothers passed down to daughters. By the 1950s, Betty Crocker brought this dish into the modern kitchen, transforming an old farmhouse staple into a middle-class dream. Housewives proudly made it for Sunday dinners, layering tender chicken, peas, and creamy sauce beneath a buttery crust. The oven's hum became the soundtrack of family life, while children waited eagerly for that first golden slice. There's an old story from Iowa, 1957. A woman named Ruth had just welcomed her husband home from the army. Money was tight, and the cupboards were half empty. But Ruth made a chicken pot pie from scraps, leftover roast chicken, canned vegetables, a bit of milk and flour. When her husband took the first bite, he said, "It tastes like home again." For Ruth, that moment meant more than any paycheck. As frozen dinners began to rise in the 1960s, the pot pie shifted once again. The homemade version became rare, replaced by aluminum trays and microwavable versions that promised the same taste, less effort. But something got lost along the way: that feeling of earned comfort, that pride in creating warmth from scratch. Today, when you bake a chicken pot pie the old-fashioned way, rolling your own crust, stirring your own filling, you're not just cooking. You're reconnecting with a forgotten rhythm of American life, the kind where food wasn't rushed, and families sat long after dinner just talking, laughing, being together. Every bite of that flaky, creamy pie holds a story, one of hard times, homecomings, and the quiet triumph of ordinary love. It shimmered like treasure under the kitchen light, a glistening mold of pastel cubes, suspended in a creamy dream. To the 1950s American homemaker, Jello crown jewel salad wasn't just dessert. It was status. Picture it: a warm suburban kitchen in 1958, the hum of a new refrigerator, and a mother in a pastel apron consulting her red Betty Crocker cookbook. She's not making cake or pie tonight, she's making art. A dessert meant to dazzle the neighbors at Sunday supper. The story of the crown jewel salad begins in the golden age of gelatin, a time when convenience met creativity. In post-war America, color meant optimism, and Jello captured that spirit in every wobble. Housewives could take a few simple boxes and create something that looked straight out of a magazine. Layers of orange, lime, and cherry cubes were cut into perfect squares, folded into whipped topping and pineapple juice, then poured into a mold to chill overnight. But beneath the sparkle, there's a quieter story, one about aspiration. In an era when women were expected to build happiness from their kitchens, recipes like this became their way of expressing artistry, pride, and individuality. Each colorful cube represented effort, beauty, and belonging, a slice of joy in an uncertain world. There's a story from Ohio, 1962. A young mother named Helen entered her first church potluck. Nervous and new in town, she brought her homemade crown jewel salad. While other women brought meatloaf or casseroles, Helen's dessert glowed like stained glass on the serving table. People gathered around it, marveling at its shine. By the end of the night, not only was her dish gone, she had 5 new friends and an invitation to the Sunday choir. That was the quiet magic of food back then. It wasn't about calories or presentation for social media, it was about connection. By the late 1970s, though, the charm began to fade. Health trends moved away from processed desserts, and mold salads became the punchline of nostalgia. But for those who remember, the Jello crown jewel salad still represents something beautiful, a moment when America believed the future could be molded into something bright, sweet, and perfectly shaped. Today, when you make it, if you dare, it's like holding a piece of edible time. The scent, the texture, the shimmer, they take you back to church basements, summer picnics, and the gentle pride of homemakers who believed every dish could bring joy. And just as one jewel fades, another shines, because next, we'll uncover a dish that once filled the air with the scent of cinnamon, butter, and caramel dreams. A dessert that made autumn feel like magic. There's something about the smell of baked apples and caramel that can stop time. Before microwaves, before fast food, that scent meant something special, home was alive again. And no recipe captured that feeling quite like the caramel apple loaf, a golden brown treasure that once graced countless American tables during autumn's chill. Its story begins in the 1940s, when sugar was rationed and every ingredient had to count. Families in small towns across the Midwest learned to bake smarter, turning bruised apples from backyard trees into something extraordinary. The original caramel apple loaf wasn't fancy, it was humble. Flour, eggs, brown sugar, butter, and apples, baked slow and brushed with a warm caramel glaze made on the stovetop, thick and golden. There's a real story from Kansas, 1943. A young woman named Elsie baked one loaf every Friday for her husband, who worked long hours repairing army vehicles. She'd pack a few slices in wax paper, still warm, for him to share with the other men. Word spread quickly, the caramel lady, they called her. For soldiers far from home, that loaf became more than food, it was a symbol of the sweetness they were fighting to protect. After the war, when prosperity returned, caramel apple loaf took on a new life. By the 1950s, Betty Crocker began featuring similar recipes in her glossy cookbooks, calling them family favorites for crisp fall evenings. Housewives proudly served it with coffee after church or as a treat for guests. The glossy caramel glaze gleamed under kitchen lights like amber, and the scent of cinnamon filled entire neighborhoods. But as time moved on, this simple loaf faded from America's recipe cards. The rise of prepackaged desserts and instant cake mixes pushed homemade loaves aside. Fewer kitchens smelled of real caramel bubbling on the stove. And somewhere along the way, that old ritual of baking not just to eat, but to share, to comfort, quietly disappeared. Yet, the caramel apple loaf still lives in the memories of those who remember autumns of the past, the creak of screen doors, the crunch of fallen leaves, the laughter of family gathered around the table. It's more than a dessert, it's a postcard from a time when food was made slowly, and love was measured by effort, not speed. If you ever bake one today, let the caramel bubble, let the apples soften, let the kitchen fill with that golden scent, you'll understand what America once tasted like. Sweet, honest, and fleeting. And next, as we turn one more page from the Betty Crocker archives, we'll uncover a dish that once defined festive gatherings, blending tradition, surprise, and a touch of creamy nostalgia, the legendary cheeseball ring. Here was a time in America when the heart of every party wasn't the music, the punch bowl, or the laughter, it was the cheeseball ring. Shining in the center of the table, surrounded by crackers and curiosity, it was more than a snack. It was the social glue of the 1950s and 60s, creamy, colorful, and full of quiet pride. The idea first appeared in post-war America when entertaining guests became a kind of art form. Betty Crocker, ever the voice of the modern homemaker, published recipes for mold cheese spreads that could impress without breaking the bank. Cream cheese, shredded cheddar, chopped pimentos, green peppers, and crushed nuts, all shaped carefully into a ring, then chilled to perfection. In an age when every detail mattered, this dish spoke of effort and elegance. But behind that perfect presentation was something deeper, a reflection of a country learning how to celebrate again. After years of war and rationing, the cheeseball ring represented abundance, comfort, and community. Neighbors gathered around the table, children sneaking crackers when they thought no one was watching, and mothers sharing recipes written neatly on index cards. There's a story from Illinois, 1956. A woman named Margaret threw a Christmas party for her husband's co-workers. She couldn't afford fancy decorations or wine, but she made one thing perfectly, her mother's cheeseball ring. It was creamy, tangy, and sprinkled with toasted almonds that caught the candlelight just right. That night, one guest, a widowed man who hadn't smiled in months, asked for a second helping. Margaret noticed tears in his eyes as he said, "My wife used to make this." That small moment reminded everyone there how food can reach the heart faster than words ever could. The cheeseball ring became an icon of its era, found at birthdays, holidays, and potlucks across small-town America. It was photographed in magazines, served at bridge clubs, and appeared on polished silver trays beside cocktails and laughter. But by the 1980s, as new trends and global flavors took over, the cheeseball's charm faded. Plastic trays replaced silver ones, and store-bought dips replaced homemade pride. Still, in the memories of those who lived through that golden time, one bite can bring it all back, the hum of vinyl records, the glow of tinsel, and the taste of something simple yet meaningful. Today, the cheeseball ring stands as a time capsule, a reminder of when hospitality was homemade, and every gathering was stitched together with warmth, laughter, and a dash of cheddar. In the golden age of backyard barbecues and pastel kitchens, there was one appetizer that ruled them all: Snappy deviled eggs. Neat, bright, and full of personality, they weren't just food, they were conversation starters. Deviled eggs first appeared in American cookbooks long before the 1950s, but it was in that post-war decade that they truly took center stage. Families were gathering again, neighborhoods were growing, and every housewife wanted her dish to stand out at the table. The secret weapon? A little snap, that perfect balance of tang and spice that made guests reach for seconds. Mayonnaise, mustard, vinegar, paprika, these were the foundations. But Betty Crocker's snappy version added something extra, a pinch of cayenne or a splash of pickle brine that gave the filling its memorable zing. These weren't your grandmother's eggs. These were modern, confident, and a little daring, just like the new America that was emerging. There's a story from Missouri, 1954. A young couple, newly married, hosted their very first picnic. Nervous and eager to impress, the wife, Mary, made a tray of snappy deviled eggs she'd copied from a Betty Crocker pamphlet. When a sudden gust of wind blew through the park, her tray tipped over, scattering eggs onto the grass. Embarrassed, she began to cry, but the guests just laughed, brushed them off, and ate them anyway. One man said, "They're too good to waste." That day, her snappy eggs became legendary in her small town. For years afterward, people requested Mary's picnic eggs at every gathering. That was the magic of the time. Food wasn't about perfection. It was about people, community, and connection. Each bite carried a memory, a story, a sense of belonging. By the 1970s, though, the once glamorous deviled egg began to fade into the background. Supermarkets offered pre-made platters, and the homemade versions, with their perfect swirl of filling and dusting of paprika, slowly disappeared from family gatherings. But in many ways, that makes them even more precious today. Because when you peel that shell, slice that egg, and spoon in that creamy, tangy filling, you're doing more than cooking, you're reviving a lost ritual. You're bringing back the laughter of picnics, the chatter of bridge clubs, the pride of homemakers who knew that even the simplest ingredients could bring joy. That the snap wasn't just in the flavor. It was in the spirit, bold, bright, and timeless. And there you have it, 10 forgotten Betty Crocker treasures that once filled American homes with laughter, love, and the unforgettable aroma of home cooking. Each dish wasn't just a recipe, it was a reflection of a time when food connected families, healed hearts, and turned ordinary nights into cherished memories. But here's what I want to know from you. Where are you watching from? How old are you right now? And which one of these forgotten classics would you love to taste again? I'd love to read your stories in the comments. Maybe your grandmother made one of these, or maybe you remember seeing them in an old cookbook on your family's kitchen shelf. Every comment helps keep these memories alive, one recipe at a time. If you enjoyed this journey into America's forgotten kitchens, make sure to subscribe to America's Lost Recipes, where every week, we bring you another story, another flavor, another piece of our shared history. Because food isn't just what we eat, it's who we are, and who we used to be. So go ahead, like, comment, and share this video with someone who loves nostalgia as much as you do. And remember, every forgotten recipe deserves to be remembered again.